Hi, Frank. I want to have a conversation with you so to provide a view for the Vietnamese to understand more how the Americans came to Vietnam. You are just one of the typical one, but I hope that after the conversation, the Vietnamese will get to understand more of why you come to Vietnam, who are you, what do you think before and after this long journey that you've been to Vietnam since 1962, I think.
Yes.
And then you got out just at the right time, 1975, before the country fell. Okay.
Yes.
Would you tell us a little bit about your background growing up as a kid?
Well, I think that one of the critical factors for me when I was young was the absence of my father. He was killed in World War II. But caring, sometimes I thought intrusive, but always concerned uncles, 6 of them, kind of kept an eye on me, and when I was occasionally in behavioral difficulty, they would intercede and do their best to see that I was back on the right track. On one occasion, the result of that was some testing psychologically at one of the universities in Boston, Massachusetts.
How old were you when they did the test?
At that time, I was 15 years old. And so I was set on the right track in terms of potentially being able to go to university. And the one toward which I was guided was American University in Washington, D.C. So I graduated from American University in 1960 and once again was guided, I would say, by some concerned professors and others who'd helped with the funding of my university education.
What's your major?
International relations. And because of the location of Washington, D.C., American University had some adjunct professors who worked otherwise with the U.S. government. One of them being in the Department of State Intelligence and Research section, who was very analytical and supportive of questions that I've raised. So I did some training in Hawaii, and while there, the person that I responded to suggested I take the Foreign Service exam. So I did do that and passed, and had the option then of either going with the Department of State or with the U.S. Information Agency, which now no longer exists since 1999 when it was abolished. And I opted for, then at their suggestion, for the USIA. Mm-hmm. And was initially put in line for potential assignment in Cambodia. But at the last minute, as developments seemed to increase pace in South Vietnam, mm-hmm. it was suggested that instead I go to South Vietnam.
Okay. Before we delving deep into that, I want to ask you, you said your major was international relations.
Yes.
Was that your choice in the beginning, or was you guided by something? And why didn't you choose something like a history, a sociology, anything like that? International relations being fairly, you know.
Well, I was interested in a variety of things. I was interested in sports medicine, for example. Part of my university tuition was paid by the athletic department. I was also provided a job in the buildings and grounds department. And then the other third was picked up by the office that was located in New York that had an interest in educational opportunities for the children of World War II veterans who'd been deceased in battle. I think that office probably no longer exists, but it certainly was a big help for me. So I had a variety of interests, but it was after the first semester where I took a variety of courses, including one in sports medicine, it was suggested that I concentrate more on history and international relations.
When you say it was suggested, then by who?
I had an advisor, faculty advisor, so
Okay.
so I made that change.
Mm-hmm.
So the choice for service in Vietnam was an evolving choice, one that evolved from my educational background, some additional training in Hawaii, an initial on paper assignment to Cambodia,
Mm-hmm.
but then as developments altered in Vietnam in 1962, it was suggested that my orders were changed for Vietnam, and I was provided with about 3 weeks of Vietnamese language training. Not very much, but enough to introduce me to the intricate nature of spelling Vietnamese, the tonal content, the difference in pronunciation between the South, Shadek, for example, versus
Sure.
Sadek, as a northerner might pronounce it. So I was off to Vietnam. Now, on arrival, I was positioned to work with a fellow named Everett Baumgartner, a USIS officer, but one with a varied background. At that time, there were not categories of boxes so much and lines of command organizationally as took place later. The people that I was meeting in Vietnam, they all seemed to know each other. John Mecklin, for example, the USIS director, had been at the Normandy breakout in World War II, had been at one point briefly captured by the Germans, had been in North Vietnam, was, I think, on the battlefield when a well-known Spanish Civil War photographer, might have been, was his name Aldo Ray? I'm not sure, but he did a famous photograph of a man falling just as he was struck by a bullet. And that Spanish photographer was killed in North Vietnam, and John Mecklin and Lou Conin were right there with him on the day that it happened.
Oh.
General Lansdale, Rufus Phillips, they all seemed to know each other, and irrespective of boxes and lines, they cooperated and worked together.
When you came in 1962, that was just a year before the assassination of President Diem.
Yes.
Did you find, like, how was Vietnam for you at that time, when 1962, when you came?
Well, I was learning, and I recall that Ev Baumgartner brought me over to a map of South Vietnam on his wall, and I recall him saying, "There's this area up here." The communists referred to it as Len Cu Nam, pretty much Quang Ngai, Binh Dinh, and Phu Yen provinces. The consulate does not get down that far south very often. They usually go roughly to around Da Nang or so and do their reporting. The embassy doesn't seem to go much further north than Nha Trang or Dalat. But that area there, we just don't know very much about. So we're going to send you up to live in Quy Nhon. Go get around, meet people, talk to the province chiefs and district chiefs, and give us reporting on what's happening, what's going on up there. So having already made a couple of field trips with him and met people like Rufus Phillips and Tran Ngọc Chow in Kinh Hoa and John Paul Van at that time in My Tho, I felt I was ready to do that. So I went off and rented a small place in Quy Nhon and dug into central Vietnam to the extent that I could. Now, early on, based on my childhood experiences in the Boston area, where I'd done everything from mow lawns and deliver newspapers to load and unload trucks, I was somewhat skeptical of authority. And so I decided that I would meet province chiefs and district chiefs. I'd be polite, welcome any information they shared with me, but I would not be dependent on that. A province chief would assume that I was reporting to the American establishment in Saigon, and they would therefore tell me what they thought I ought to be telling others. I wanted to get, you might say, into the woods or on the trails and look at hamlets and get a feeling for it myself. And that's what I did, and I think that's what made others appreciate what I was doing. For example, you mentioned the tension with respect to President Siem. Lou Conine was very involved in that. He was the most critically involved, you might say. And because he knew John Mecklin so well, he went to John Mecklin and said that he wanted to meet with Mecklin's field people from the Delta and Central Vietnam to get some idea what were the attitudes and the psychology out in those parts of Vietnam. So the USIS fellow from Can Tho and mine brought down from Central Vietnam, we got together at John Mecklin's house, and we provided Lou Conine with a picture of what we thought the situation was out there. Now, one result of that was that Lou Conine, although I did not work with him in September of '63, went to John Mecklin and said that he wanted me brought from Central Vietnam down to Dalat. To be in Dalat in case there might be a meeting, an important meeting at the president's guest house with the American ambassador or anybody else, or just be there. But so young I was and so low in status and ignorant, one might even say, I didn't know any of that. And I resented being told that I had to relocate
to Dalat.
To Dalat. I thought to myself, relative to what's going on in Quang Ngai, Binh Dinh, and Phu Yen, and Pleiku, and Kon Tum, what the hell would I be doing in Dalat? And I'd be replacing a fellow there temporarily named Douglas Ramsey, who would then go up to Central Vietnam. So, it wasn't until I was there, and then it turned out there was a meeting 3 days before the coup and the murder. There was a meeting between President Siem and Ambassador Lodge. So I was the one on the spot who met them at Cam Ly Airport and spoke with them both, and particularly spent quite a time talking with Ambassador
So intentionally,
Lodge.
Lou wanted you to be there because he thought that's what happened.
Later, when I got to know him better and had a conversation with him, I said, I wasn't angry, everything had gone down, but this was about a year or more later, and I said, I said, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know anything. And his response was, nobody knew. Nobody knew what was going to happen. See, so, I said, I don't know what the heck I could have done. And he said, well, him being much older and more experienced, he said, well, you're a smart kid. You would have figured something out. See, that's how loosely evolving and I wouldn't even say constructed, because I don't think it was constructed, but the whole situation was murky and confusing, I think.
So you think at that time the American didn't actually know much about Vietnam, and you would be the first mission, and even the first mission people didn't know?
I mean, I was still learning. I don't think that I knew a lot about Vietnam, but I would, instead of asking others, I was trying to learn for myself. I did walk, I think by that time, maybe 4 different trails to see what was going on those.
Who are using all of the information that you're gathering? Is it for the USIA? Is it for the Foreign
Service? Well, it would go
Service?
initially to Everett Bumgardner, and then Everett Bumgardner shared it. And Everett Bumgardner was a guy who did not think or work within boxes. He again had known lots of people, so if he saw I came in with an interesting report on the Bato area in Quang Ngai, I'm sure he would shovel that somewhere within the American system.
What was the relationship between the agencies that are working at the time, like the CIA, the Foreign Service, and the USIA, obviously?
Well, I'm not sure what the formal relationship was. But the informal working relationship was that, at least at that time, people didn't seem to pay excessive attention to organizational boundaries. They seemed to be able to reach across.
Are you talking including the military or just on the civilian side?
That was a different situation. Here and there, when I traveled, for instance, I would find an advisor, a province advisor, who really seemed to care about learning the happenstance of that particular province and what was going on. But most of the military, I think, were following kind of pro forma approaches to what it was they had to do. And I know that there were requirements. I didn't have a specific reporting requirement. I was told by Bumgardner to report what I thought was important. But the military had reporting requirements. And I know at one point when General Timmis, who was at that time MACV and MAG were distinct. Later, after General Timmis left, MACV absorbed MAG. But when General Timmis was head of MAG, he came up to Quang Ngai, and at a lunch with the Quang Ngai province advisor, Major Bob Kelly, who later worked with me on the in developing the locally based anti-communist units that Frank Snepp mentioned. Kelly was a good guy and a kind of an irregular sort of army major. So General Timmis said to him at lunch, I was about 3 chairs away, he said, Kelly, they tell me that you're ash-canning some of our report requests. And the night before, Kelly had complained to me, he said, God damn it, they keep asking for this, asking for that, They want me to count sandwich wrappers or something. So Kelly said, I could see him kind of drawing himself up, offended, and then he said, well, no, sir, but it seems sometimes that the way the report requests are phrased, it's almost like they're presupposing I'm going to give a certain answer. And then the general Timmy said, Kelly, you're full of shit. Well, Kelly was a World War II veteran of the Pacific Islands, and so he, I could see him kind of drawing himself up like, nobody told me that. But then he realized, General, Major, and he subsided him, and he said, yes, sir. So there was that kind of tension, and it was rare for me to find someone like Major Kelly who would consciously look deeper than what the reports indicated was expected of him. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think Kelly was such a keystone to what it was that we did subsequently.
From what you're telling me, it seems like you, the American, I would say, have different organizations that's going into different direction that not necessarily coordinate with one another in their report and their outlook. And like the military is going one way, and you are going USIA in another way, and then possibly other organizations like the CIA is going still in another different direction. and gathering your own information from the government. You're telling me it's very pro forma, and in your case, it's very informal. And I don't know what the CIA is doing, but how are all this connected?
I think that each of the different organizations had their organizational bias towards information collection. And you know, that may have been the case with some elements of USIA too. I know at that time, I think USIA had begun doing a weekly film newscast on behalf of the Ministry of Information. And
the Ministry of Information of the Vietnamese people?
Of the Vietnamese government. I think that they were helping them, or not yet doing it for them, but helping them. And the embassy political section had its kind of requirements as a formula for example, the consul in Hue to be responsive of, in the political section, the young officers that would go out and make a report and come back. The Central Intelligence Agency had specific elements of tasking that they would place upon officers who would go to the field. At that time, there was not much of a field presence, but they had officers, for instance, who would go down to Kien Hoa, spend 2 or 3 days there, observe what Tran Nguyen Chow was doing, and make a report. The difference in my case, which allowed me, I think, to pursue a different kind of education within Vietnam, is that Ev Baumgardner did not place requirements upon me. You know, it was a extraordinarily broad charter. You know, go to Central Vietnam, Quang Ngai, Binh Dinh, Phu Yen, and if you must, you know, up to Kon Tum and Pleiku, but the populated area of those 3 provinces, you know.
What was it that you're trying to find out?
What's happening? What's important?
What criteria are you looking for when you're saying looking for something that you think is important? But what are the criteria that you're using to judge whether one event or one person is more important than other, and how do you go about that?
Well, in the beginning, for example, I spent about almost a month with the 4th Psychological Operations Company that was actually a special operations company commanded by Nguyen Thuy, with a Jirai, Captain Yu Xiu, as his deputy, and they were operating within the An Lao Valley. My landlord in Quy Nhon had told me that was a critical area in Binh Dinh province. So I went up and spent almost a month with them, and I learned. You know, I learned about the history of that area and the presence of the residual presence of the communists. And just to tell you one story, there were firing illumination rounds from mortars to indicate the location, and then with loudspeakers, and having gone up into the foothills, Captain Thuy's men invited anyone who wanted to leave the communist side to, you know, come towards the light, come in. So actually, within a period of about...
Is it like rallying effort?
Yeah, well, he didn't call it that, but 3 people who'd been in communist base area came down. They were tired and they didn't really want to do it anymore.
Was it effective, what they're doing? Was it very effective?
Well, they were being trained, but they left. So as I was speaking with them, and at that point my Vietnamese was so cranky I needed help from an interpreter, but as I spoke with them, and I asked them at one point, kind of just out of curiosity, how long had that base area been in a place called Con Truc? You may recall from my email address. And the answer was 1945. And I remember kind of not staggering backwards, but kind of leaning backward and thinking, 1945, when I was 7 years old, there was a communist area there, and this is 1963. So how long ago was it that they already had a training area there? And within the first several months that I was spending time in that area, that part of Vietnam, there were moments like that that made me realize this is really, really difficult. You know, it's not a simple matter of communism being foisted upon people in Hungary. You know, this, like it or not, they have placed roots here. The roots are transplanted maybe from the Comintern via Ho Chi Minh, but they've got roots in this place. So that was you know, a real kind of
eye-opening experience.
Yeah, an eye-opening experience, and it I think in some ways it colored everything I did thereafter. So I was doing that, and then you know, they were talking about trails. So I, with the advice, helpful advice of Captain Thuy, who remained a good friend over the years, I walked a few of those trails, probably no more than 6 or 7.
What's the point? What's the point for walking the trails?
I wanted to see who else was on those trails. Now, would I have done that if I was older and more experienced? Maybe not. But I was young at the time. And I thought, and I remember...
And nobody ever told you to walk the trails or anything like that? It's completely...
No, nobody told me to, but nobody told me not to. And I was thinking to myself, you know, we had the old French maps at that point, and you could see the movement of trails from place to place. So I thought to myself, well, I'm going to do that. And Thuy gave me some advice, and even my landlord.
They weren't against it at all as you walk the trail. They wouldn't give you any one.
Well, Thuy said, you know, you be very, very careful, and even the landlord, you know, said, you know, be careful out there. But he helped me go to the market and get a local mosquito net and dye it, and then told me, you know, that even if you're not bothered by mosquitoes, he said, if you're anywhere, you know, don't sleep on the trail. Get off the trail. Get under some bushes. Pull that mosquito net over you. You know, disappear into the...
So actually your experience and your training is not actually by the American, but very much by the Vietnamese who were in that local area.
By Vietnamese, and by kind of you know, a mental inclination on my part, calculation. So anyway, as the years passed, and you know, there's a tendency to befriend those who think like you. And so I was making friends with other Americans, but they tended to be people who thought the same way as I did. Now, you know, jumping ahead to that 1963 episode, I had seen from the spring onward that there were real social, meaning foundational problems for politics, difficulties in central Vietnam with respect to the Catholic Buddhist issue.
Be more concrete of what you see as you see as something almost like the beginning of an upheaval, is that what you say?
Well, I could see that in the spring of '63. For instance, the ARVN units in An Lao Valley were withdrawn from the An Lao Valley for troop re-education. And I thought that was a mistake. And sure enough, at the end of 1963, I think in December of '63 or January of '64, the first district, Republic of Vietnam, to be completely taken over by the communists was An Lao in Binh Dinh province.
And did you know
they just
who made the decision to pull back the troop? Do you know?
Well, I think it was on the part of the government of President Siem, because they thought they needed, the soldiers needed indoctrination, because you had the problem between the government and Buddhists. I wouldn't say Catholics and Buddhists, because in Quy Nhon, where I talked a lot with Catholics in the seminary and Buddhists in the pagodas, the feeling was in general on both parts deep regret that this had come to pass. But I think that with respect to the 9th Division, at least, which at that time was located in Binh Dinh province, the problem, as the 9th Division commander saw it, was keeping troop loyalty. And so they pulled back and they did a lot of troop indoctrination.
And then they just let it open like that?
Well, there was that, but then another factor was that the government, Saigon, whether Americans or Vietnamese or whatever organization and agency, Saigon always seemed to me to be most sensitive to developments in the provinces around Saigon. So there was already a plan to the 9th Division had been raised and trained in Binh Dinh. There was a plan to transfer it to the Mekong Delta.
And for what reason?
Well, because they were excessively, well, I wouldn't, maybe not excessively, they were more concerned about deteriorating security in the provinces close to Saigon than they were elsewhere. And there was a developing plan to transfer the 25th Division from Quang Ai further south.
This is the first republic you're talking about. They're still worrying about these problems.
But they were already planning. So when I met, when I had a conversation with President Lodge in Dalat there at the end of October, I think it was October 28th. Part of my conversing with him was to try to explain to him what a disastrous decision this was to be moving the 9th Division from Central Vietnam to the Delta and planning for the 25th Division to later move from Central Vietnam to the Delta. Mm-hmm. That if they needed 2 additional divisions in the Delta, raise the divisions, equip and train them in the Delta, but don't create a vacuum in a critical part of the country.
So you feel like because of the so-called lack of understanding of the front, or do they really care more about Saigon? Is it the decision is being made by the government or by the military side here to move the troops from the central to the south?
I think that the decision to move those 2 divisions to the area west and south of Saigon was a decision that
executive branch,
both MACV and the government of Vietnam kind of agreed upon. I don't think that the Americans told the Vietnamese to do it, but I think that the Americans didn't argue against doing it. See, the problem was if they needed 2 divisions there, as I saw it, they should raise 2 new divisions. But on the American side, maybe then they were thinking about, well, how do we finance that? How do we equip that? How do we go about doing it? But it was a non-political decision made in late 1963 that had disastrous consequences.
And you said by that time you did not have a lot of so-called invasion and attack from the north. That's why it's possible to think in that term, which was later proved. Like
well,
you said.
you had people. I was introduced to a guy, a Banar tribesman that I mentioned in my book, and was captured in An Khe and had been wounded in the foot. He had been relocated to the north, and now he had re-infiltrated, and despite being wounded, a lot of self-confidence and pretty sharp-minded guy. So there were people coming in, but you did not have battalion size units or regimental size units coming in yet. But you did have a lot of activity in central Vietnam and elsewhere in Vietnam, and
Do you think that the American side by that time was fully informed of this, or it's just you people in front and trying to find out the problem that sends this, but not the central office?
I think that generally speaking, on the American side, we were not as well informed as we should have been. I thought in some respects the embassy was functioning as any embassy would in any other part of the world. Mm-hmm. And I thought that embassies, I thought we needed a different approach, but we weren't getting it.
But the Vietnamese, do you think the Vietnamese sees the problem, or do they see the problem and have to do it because there's an order from the central government, or do they not see these things just like the American?
I thought that some Vietnamese saw the problem. I thought that Captain Thuy, for example, who commanded that 4th Independent Company, I thought he definitely saw it. I thought that Tran Van Hai, later police director and then finally 7th Division commander, where he committed suicide in 1975, he was the province chief in Phu Yen when I met him, and then temporarily in command of the 47th Regiment. I thought he was very sharp, very perceptive, and he saw that. But then others, I didn't think saw it. It was almost as if they thought that whatever the communists did would be irrelevant because now they had independence and they could organize, and they were ready to do whatever needed to be done. And I thought I met Ton That Dinh, for example. I don't want to be disparaging of someone, but I could hardly believe that he was a general officer when I met him. I thought he was.
And that was at the time you were only 22 something, and this your perception by then that
very young, yeah.
he was very incompetent, so say.
Yeah. Well, let me mention quickly something else. One consequence of there were so many consequential items falling out from the 1963 murder of the president and things like that. But one was that there'd been some discussion in the White House about whether or not security was deteriorating in any part of the country. And Rufus Phillips had a report from the USOM representative in Long An province indicating that there was real deterioration there, fairly close to Saigon. So in December of '63, before I was allowed to go back to Central Vietnam, I was brought down to Saigon, and Ev Baumgartner had obtained, some pistols from the CIA station that could be used in a concealed fashion. And he said, I don't know exactly how you want to do it, but I want you to do a quick survey in this area of Long An, from Tan An, the province capital, to the My Tho border, province border area, or Din Tung it was called at that time, an area of 30 or 40 hamlets. MACV says it's secure. USOM says it's not. Can you get in there and find out what's happening? So I said, yeah, sure. So that as a precursor to what my brother Frank Snip mentioned as work with small teams. For the first time then, I was given responsibility to go into an area, find out what would happen, and do it any way I wanted to. So I organized 3 teams and equipped them and everything and said, okay, we'll go in here, talk with someone from every family in a hamlet. And we'll work in 3 adjoining hamlets at the same time. And at nighttime, we'll regroup into one of those 3 hamlets. so that we'll have maybe 20, 24 people for nighttime defense. In the daytime, you'll be back out with 6 or 8 people in a team. And here are the basic questions I want you to ask to find out. I want you to develop a history. What has happened in that hamlet? What do the people think is the most important thing in their lives? What we did find over a roughly 3-week period is that Rufus Phillips and USOM representative had been correct. There was tremendous deterioration in that area. The communists, led by a woman fighter, were ascendant. The front barbed wire sections of all the so-called strategic hamlets had been retained, but the side and rear portions of the defensive works were all gone. There was one local force, triangular-shaped, mud-walled fort representing the government, flying the government flag. But they never went outside of a little triangular area. They were isolated. And by the way, about a month after I left, they were overrun. So that report went up into the embassy and had some fallout effect. But it was also educative for me, because I learned from that we can organize, at least on a local tactical level, we can organize as well as the communists. I wouldn't say better, but we can do it just as well. And at that point of the war, we can have better equipment, and it's possible to make a difference. So going about a month or so later, then being released, you might say, to return back up to central Vietnam, and seeing this fellow Major Kelly that I had mentioned previously. Kelly told me that a former Viet Minh named Nguyen Duy Bear, I mentioned his name because he's deceased now, had approached the district chief in Trung Ia and asked, feared the return of the communists and his punishment, and he had asked for some help in organizing a self-defense unit. So Kelly brought me down to the hamlet where this fellow met. Diminutive, but vibrant with personality. And I wanted to meet him because I didn't want to just sign off on, okay, I'm going to go to friends and special forces and the CIA station and ask for weapons and, a supplement for meals during training and things. And then I find out the guy's a bum. But he was very impressive. And so that was the start of a local self-defense force that, according to the concept that we worked up together, Nguyen Duy Bear, Major Kelly, and myself, would be mobile at that point within a district area, never going beyond that district, but mobile within that district, working, as I had done in Long Island Province, working during the daytime, maybe in 3 different adjoining hamlets. And I say working by helping people, or just being friendly, visiting the schools, passing out things, doing anything at all, but being an active presence. And at nighttime, being in one hamlet, grouped together. Not in a fort, not in an outpost, in the hamlet. So if the communists had to come in, they were the ones that would have to enter a hostile hamlet. See? And that was the beginning, unfortunately, eventually with a lot of bureaucratic adjustments.
When you're talking to the villagers, are they more so-called political aware of the situation? Are they actively choosing side, communists or nationalists, or do they don't know anything? And
Well, there were in any location you could find that there were some people who were in, I think, significant part because of family connections. There were some people who were supporters of the communists. There were others, also for personal reasons, family members who had perhaps been killed by the communists, or frustration at communist requests for assistance in terms of foodstuffs and things like that, that were not at all supportive of the communists. But in any case, absent meaningful government presence in the hamlets, they had to be responsive.
So actually they don't have a political awareness of whatever. It seems like they are making the decision based on the historical thing that their family are doing. It's whether the communists or nationalists.
Now in some areas, like in Quinoa, where I had zero experience, but Tran Kop Chow used to talk to me about it. He said in some areas, from 1940 onward, roughly, there had been, to a certain degree, off and on, communist governance in some few local areas, and that was the case, I know, in Binh Dinh and Phu Yen and Quang Ai too. So some people were offended by that, but for other people, my landlord, for example, he said that during that period of the war against the French, the postal system, that was a Viet Minh postal system.
Yes.
If a road needed repaired,
yes,
the Viet Minh organized people to repair the road, all those kinds of things. And he said, some people don't like that, but he said some people still respect it. And he was never very clear with me which group he might be in, but he was very supportive of me and very, very helpful. And
when you talk about that specific landlord, how does he feel about the government side as versus the communist side? He's living right at the border.
He was a pretty intelligent fellow. He thought that the government side, for family reasons, had terribly mishandled the 1963 Hue incident. And he is the first person who actually told me that the problem was not Ngo Dinh Khan. The problem had been Ngo Dinh Thuc. Because he said Ngo Dinh Thuc,
the archbishop,
had been made archbishop in Hue, and it had been celebrated with Vatican flags and things. I forget exactly when, but he said several days before the Buddha birthday holiday.
Yes.
And the Buddhists were offended because they were not allowed to fly their flags, and Ngo Dinh Thuc, he said, more than Ngo Dinh Khan, had pushed for a heavy police response. So, I mean, I thought that was all, educative for me. Not terribly helpful in the end because, nobody...
So that seems to me like those are internal issues rather than between the nationalists and the communists. We've been talking about these things.
Yeah, but I think it made it more difficult for the nationalists to deal with the communists. See, the communists, generally speaking, presented a united front, even though there might be internal frictions with respect to personalities or difference of opinion, but they were, relatively speaking, a more united front, I think. Whereas the non-communists, I think, were unfortunately fractured. Now, with time, maybe it could have been ameliorated, if not reduced to irrelevancy, but we ran out of time. See, and just as the the people in Vietnam had, had difference of opinions. On the American side also, we were relatively fractured.
You're talking about the American?
On the American side, yeah. I think that we didn't have the kind of pulling together that we needed. And some of the Americans who I think were capable of doing that, I think Rufus Phillips certainly did, for example. I mean, he had institutional loyalty and regard, but Rufus wanted to get people to work together. There were some important differences of opinion. You look at the CIA station chief, Pierre de Silva, for example, and Frank may have some thinking about this, but I personally liked Pierre de Silva. But we had a fundamental difference on how to approach the matter of specialized small units of the sort that I had worked with Nguyen Xuy Bae and Major Kelly, and I brought some instructors who've been with me in a couple of other programs up there to get it started. And I wanted localized effort. As I said to Pierre one time, that it happens that 40-man units in 3 squads is what seemed to Nguyen Xuy Bae and Kelly and me to be workable in Quang Ngai, but maybe in Shadek we're going to be talking about an 18-person unit. But in any case, the effort, I think, has to be locally tailored and initiated and trained. Whereas I understood pretty quickly that for Pierre, organizationally, what he wanted to do was centralized training. He wanted a kind of one size fits all, and he wanted to do it in a national training center. So the result was that I was detailed off to work with MACV, and then later with Special Forces, and the intensive training was for rural development cadre, as they came to be called, was placed in a national training center in Vung Tau, where eventually another good friend of mine, Nguyen Bae, was put in charge after General Vinh Lop had attempted to have him assassinated on a difference of opinion over corruption.
What you're describing seems to me more about the tactics. What about the ideas? I mean, the so-called idealistic thing in the mind of these people. Is there any effort going in that direction, or are you just trying to provide them between the communists and the government? Seems to both competing for satisfying the needs at the local.
My immediate interest, because of where I was sent in that period, 62 and 63, and what I was trying to do, 63, 64, 65, 66, was in the local, very much in the local. And I thought if it was correctly applied, it could have a satisfactory outcome nationally. In terms of national politics, my belief was that that would have to evolve, and I thought in every country it would have to evolve. But I thought that it would have to evolve in Vietnam, but that it probably could.
But it seems like the North has already politically evolved faster than in the South, at least, because there seems to be, you're talking about the unity between the different organizations in the North, and they seem to bind together, and they have a political strain that's really clearly more obvious than we do in the South, because most people would argue, like, what would be the competing version of the communist view from the
Well,
North, and we don't have.
That needed to evolve, but I thought there was a possibility. I wouldn't go far as to say probability, but there was a possibility that could evolve if the military circumstances in the rural areas could stabilize a bit. And there were kind of some, I would say, like in hydraulics, there were some eddies of encouragement. I thought that the Constituent Assembly to draw up a constitution was a positive step, not one that I was very much involved with, but just as an observer and a reader of things, and occasionally conversing with someone like Dang Ban Sung when I would be down in Saigon, friends introducing me to them.
But don't you think that's still in the city, and it seems to be like among the elite? I'm talking here at the local and the peasant.
But there was some, in the Constituent Assembly, there was some serious conversation about having elected, not just elected advisory province councils, but elected province assemblies and elected province chiefs. Now the South Vietnam military vetoed that, so that when you got the Constituent Assembly had recommended it, but it was vetoed by the military council, and so when the Constitution was adopted, it did not provide for elected province chiefs. Now, my thinking, and I apologize if anybody watching thinks that I'm being unnecessarily derogatory, but I think that those who commanded the Vietnamese military at the time felt that elected province chiefs, elected province governments would vitiate the chain of corruption that was already well established at that time, whereby corps commanders pretty much determined who would be province chiefs. And some provinces were relatively lucrative. Let's say you look at my old province of Binh Dinh, for example, building the Phu Quoc Air Base, the Queen Yan Harbor, the movement of supplies on Highway 19 to the Highlands, the supplies for the Korean division, transportation was a lot of.
So you think the AVIN is doing this for their own benefit rather than the country's benefit, is what you're seeing?
Well, I thought that the country would definitely benefit by having elected province governments, and some friends of mine in the Vietnamese military agreed. One of my friends again, Thuy, who by that time was a lieutenant colonel, he said, "Well, not all those elected to be province chiefs will be competent. But then not all battalion commanders are competent."
Yes.
So the level of competence in every field has to be raised.
And also the question of whether to having the elected official at the local. I think a couple of people from the AVIN told me that it's also they are thinking about communist infiltration, and you could possibly have a communist being elected as one of the officers. Is what they are against? Is that just an excuse, or is that something that could happen?
It may not be simply an excuse. It may have been a fear organizationally that would happen, but I would say it would just be one of those things that you had to risk for the principle. The principal difference between us and the communists was that we believed that people choose their leadership. The communists believed that they, at least temporarily, had to impose leadership because they knew better than anybody else what had to be done. See?
I see.
So it was a choice that we could have made, but we didn't. Now I know that. If you'll excuse me for jumping ahead a decade or so, but I know that you're going to speak with my friend, my brother, Frank Snepp, so let me mention something about about Frank. I didn't have a lot of respect for a lot of American officers there, but I developed tremendous respect for Frank very quickly, and here's how it happened. I worked for a time for Bill Colby when he was running the rural development program in MacV with the rank of ambassador, and he had pulled me in, and a remarkable person in many respects, and said that he wanted me to be his special assistant for field problems. And I initially said that I didn't want to do that because, first of all, there were a lot of things that we did that I didn't agree with. His response to that was, if you and I would agree on everything, I wouldn't need you. Okay, and then I told him, still trying to weasel out of it, I said, well, also, I'm not a very good office person. I'm not comfortable in an office environment. And he said, if I were to see you in the office every day, I would be disappointed.
Okay.
It's a hell of a thing.
So the thing that in your mind and in his mind are completely different.
Yeah.
What he's having in for you and what you thinking you were doing were
yeah.
at
So I
odds.
wound up being his special assistant. Now, there was a time in '71 where he went back to Washington, D.C. on consultations and to see his family and a couple of other things. And while he was there, Congressman Pete McCloskey, a Korean War decorated veteran, saw him and said that he was going to come out to make a kind of eyeball visit on Vietnam, and he wanted to see it as it was, not as people wanted him to see it.
Mm.
So Colby sent what we call a back channel message to Saigon and said he wanted me to be the escort for McCloskey. Much later, when I expressed some surprise when he was back in Saigon, he said, well, I knew you wouldn't let anybody lie to him, that you would be tough when you had to and you wouldn't let it happen. And I remember him saying, in our system of government, the worst thing you can do is lie to an elected representative of the people. It doesn't make any difference what you think about that person. It's the principle. So I accompanied McCloskey. Once someone was going to lie to him in Da Nang, I interrupted, didn't allow that to happen. In Quang Ngai province, McCloskey wanted to go to the site where an American unit had murdered more than 500 Vietnamese hamlet dwellers.
You're talking about My Lai, or is that a different?
Well, it's in Tu Kung hamlet.
Mm-hmm.
If you looked at the old maps that the military used, that hamlet is shown as My Lai 4, because they never got the names of hamlets right, I would say, but it's actually Tu Kung hamlet. So at the 23rd Division headquarters, he was told by the deputy division commander that it wasn't possible to bring him there because it was insecure. So I waited politely until the coffee break and then pulled the assistant division commander and said, that doesn't wash. We're going to go there. And if you don't arrange it, I'm going to arrange it through the district chief. So he capitulated, and we went there, and with me interpreting, he saw the ditch where more than 100 bodies were extracted. We walked through the hamlet. It was like an Old West ghost town, empty houses. In other hamlets around there, people were returning. People were in the fields working, not in that one. So Pete McCloskey was shaken by the experience, but he digested it. Anyway, as a result, and we formed a friendship. Pete McCloskey is still alive here in California. We last spoke about 3 or 4 months ago on the phone. Well, in 75, I already knew Frank Snepp. We'd been in a couple of meetings together, and I knew he was a sharp-minded, perceptive officer with important responsibilities. The Assistant Secretary of State, Phil Habib, was bringing a congressional delegation late March, early April, 75, critical time, to Vietnam. And Pete McCluskey was one of the members of Congress who was going to be included, and he told Phil Habib that he wanted me in the group too. So I went back there. Well, the opening embassy briefing for the congressman within the group was, most politely I could put it, was deceptive. Was not forthcoming, and not even just that, but I thought misrepresented the situation in their eagerness to try to wrangle congressional approval for more funding, but it was dishonest. And Frank was not in the group. He was not in the panel of embassy officers, but should have been, given his responsibilities. Should have been. I was surprised he was not there, and I didn't have a lot of respect for the deputy ambassador, the head of the political section. Oh, just awful. So being not quite as cranky as I was when I was a young man, but still feeling disturbed. When I was back with the delegation in the housing that had been provided, Pete McCluskey came over and he said, "What did you think of that briefing?" I said, "It was urinarily poor." Speaking in rougher language than that. And he said, "Well, what can I do? How can we get the facts?" And so I said, "Okay, are you going to see Polgar, Tom Polgar at all?" Polgar was the senior CIA officer there. Also, a guy who I didn't have much respect for, much less affection, having dealt with him a couple of times before. And he said, "Yes, I will be." And I said, "Okay, when you see Tom Polgar, flatter him, but say that you understand that a very knowledgeable, involved officer in his staff is Frank Snepp, and you'd like to have an opportunity to speak with him. And flatter Polgar." Yeah. So Pete McCluskey was able to be educated by our friend Frank Snepp. The next morning, as I was sitting at a breakfast table having coffee and donuts with Bella Abzug and Mildred, I forget her name, a Congress lady from New Jersey, and another congressman, I think the head of the delegation from Georgia, Pete McCluskey came up to me and grabbed me by the shoulders and said, "Thanks for that referral. That was really great. Boy, it was so much better than the embassy briefing. And you're right, your friend, he really understands what's going on and what a difference it's made." And then he pumped my shoulder again and he walked away. Immediately then, the other congressional people said, "Oh, we want to talk to the same person. We want to talk to the same person." See? Shit. Well, excuse me. I called Frank on the phone and explained the situation to him, and I said, "Look, I understand it's difficult for you and all, but these people really want to talk to you. 999 out of 1,000 Foreign Service, CIA, young Army officers would have said, 'Oh shit, I can't do it.' Frank said, 'I'll do it.' Following the Bill Colby dictum that you can never lie to an elected representative of the American people. And, Frank, walk the gangplank, the tightrope. And he met with those congressional people, and he told it the way it was, the situation. I already had a great deal of affectionate regard for him, but that has anchored my commitment to him as a person and a great guy over the following decades.
Well, back to the 1963, after President Diem fell,
Yeah.
did you see a lot of change in Vietnam compared to the time before? You got in 1962, so 1963 would have been 1 year after
Well,
that.
it's hard to say because, for instance, in Long An, where I went down and conducted that survey of hamlets and to do a report on what had actually happened there, the newly appointed province chief was Lê Minh Dao.
Oh,
And it was the first time I met Lê Minh Dao. Subsequently, I got to know him better, but he was dynamic. He was concerned. He was responsive, and I remember leaving and going back up to Dalat en route to other points further north, and seeing Kim Vui, with whom I was in love at the time, and am now still, and telling her, if this is the kind of change we will get in terms of military leadership, then we might have a workable situation. Well, Lê Minh Dao, it turned out, first of all, I think was only there for about 3 or 4 months before there was another change. And every time there was a change at the national level, then you'd get these downstream changes in corps and province. So he was removed as Long An province chief, but I thought that there was just too much jockey playing and jockeys jumping from horseback to horseback during that period of late 63, 64, 65. So many of them looking for their own personal advantage, and then you wind up with some that I thought marginal or incompetent, like General Vinh Lop, who was made 2 Corps commander for a time. Vietnamese as he was, he knew less about the area in 2 Corps than I did. And his interest in Binh Dinh province seemed to be appointing a nephew of his wife as province chief in Binh Dinh so that they could derive some lucrative income from things like the Phu Quoc Air Base construction, things like that.
Okay. So the change is it's still chaotic. It's not stable enough for you to do an evaluation whether that's a better or worse time.
Well, except in some cases like Lê Minh Dao, I could see right away. I said, there's some real hope here, expectation of positive change. But there was a lack of consistency during that period, I thought.
Would you say in that period it was chaotic enough for the American to come in, or you still think that it's possible for the Vietnamese to go it alone with the aid of the American?
Well, at 64 it might have been, but once you had 65 was a bit of a change. You had the battles at Ba Gia in Quang Ngai, where a district town was lost, but also a substantial ARVN defeat. The Battle of Binh Gia in Military Region 3. Sometimes the two are confused by foreign writers, but they're 2 quite different battles, but they were both losses for the
Vietnamese
for the
side,
for the Republic
ARVN,
of
yes.
Government of Vietnam. I think of there having been 2 RVNs, the First Republic,
And the
then
second.
a GVN,
Yes.
and then another RVN.
So, would you say the Americanization of the war, if it could be called that, Was that at the right time? Was that the right decision, or was that just something?
Well, again, I had a falling out. Two friends of mine, Jack Galvin, who later became the NATO commander, and much later, and Jack Gibney, who worked with me on a couple of projects. They knew in 66, 67, I think it was, when I was going back to Washington at one point, and I guess it was in 67, and they arranged for me to see the Secretary of the Army. At the time, Gibney had been a classmate at West Point of Jack Galvin, and Galvin was the military assistant to the Secretary of the Army. So they provided me with an opportunity, and I went in there, and I'd already tried to make the case in Saigon to no avail. And I with the Secretary of the Army, Stan Resor, who was a World War II veteran, I tried to make the case for creating a barrier, a human barrier, using the American forces from Lao Bao on the Lao border with Quang Tri across to Savannah Ket on the Mekong, and not allowing anything from the north to come south. And Secretary Resor listened politely, and I said that the world would yell and scream, particularly those sympathetic to the communists, and we would have to make the case that fine, replace us with a United Nations peacekeeping force, but isolate the north from the south. And I told him that if we do not isolate the north from the south, then we will eventually lose. Because I said, you have to understand, the government of North Vietnam is not a government of North Vietnamese. It's a government of Central Vietnamese, one prominent North Vietnamese, but who, by our source, has already married a Southerner at that time. And his life has been spent in the war against the French, and now the war against the government of South Vietnam in the South. So you're not talking about a North Vietnamese government. You're talking about you might almost say a Central Vietnamese government that's trying to unify the country. So I said, if we do not isolate the North from the South, and accept the yelling and screaming that will happen until the UN can replace us, we can't win this, because Americans will get tired. We got tired in Korea. We got tired in other places.
So you're arguing for somewhere in the middle, not exactly intervention, but not exactly withdrawal. Also, it's just introducing.
I didn't see us as intervening in the North.
No.
My feeling was, let the North be the North, but don't let the North take over don't let Central Vietnamese communists take over the South.
Yes.
And make it a unified.
That's why I say that
country.
You're recommending the course of just prevention.
Prevention. So that have that barrier. And I said, then, just as in Korea, it took decades, but you have time for representative government to evolve. That will happen in South Vietnam too, but you have to preserve a distinct South Vietnam identity. And the way to do that is a barrier. But if we don't do that barrier, I don't see us.
Do you see the barrier as the same thing as the American Eyes of the War that the American did, except they don't establish that barrier, but they still put that much of American there? Would the barrier still take the same amount of soldiers coming to Vietnam like that?
Oh, it might have taken less. It might have taken less, because the problem with the presence there were a lot of problems. with respect to the presence of American forces in the South, but one of them was that you had to sprinkle them countrywide. And there was this game that children used to play called whack-a-mole. You know, well, you were playing whack-a-mole countrywide, but as you were playing whack-a-mole, you were also killing a lot of South Vietnamese innocently. I mean, the conduct of the 9th Division in the Mekong Delta area and what it meant in terms of civilian casualties, civilian displacements, was so great that that was the 1st Division chosen by MACV to be withdrawn. John Paul Van referred to the 9th as the bloody 9th American Division.
Yeah, you're talking about John Paul Van. Tell us more about him and how's your contact with him, and what's your impression of his performance and things like that?
Again, my introduction to him was via Ev Baumgartner and Rufus Phillips. I thought of him as when I first met him, as a cocky, boastful, pushy, arrogant kind of guy. But I came to be impressed by his commitment, his activity, his range of friendships and contacts, and you know, I think it was okay. And I was with him. I don't know if I put it in the book or not, but I was with him once when he transferred to 2 Corps. Colby allowed me to go up and spend a couple of weeks kind of helping him adjust to the difference between the Mekong Delta and 2 Corps. And at one point there'd been an outpost overrun near Cheo Reo in Phu Bon province. And we went down there in his helicopter piloted by Warrant Officer Richards, and we found a surviving regional forces soldier, badly wounded. So I got in the back of the little Loach helicopter, and Van lifted the guy in and kind of astride me, and we headed back up to Pleiku to get to the hospital. Well, en route, sometime before we touched down, that regional forces soldier died as I was holding him. And when we landed, and Van walked around, I said, he's gone. And Van went over to the tail towards the thing. I mean, I was afraid he might walk into the rotor, but he didn't get that far, but he just went towards the tail, and then he started pounding, you know, on the thing and saying, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we could have saved that little guy's life, you know. And for the moment, more than anything else in the world, that's what mattered to him, is he tried to save the guy and the guy died. So Van was I would say, a kind of an exotic guy, but you know, definitely committed, and I liked him.
Do you feel like he worked well with the American, and the American understand him more than the Vietnamese, kind of? Because what you were saying in the beginning about his being bombastic and arrogant and all that, does that make any impact on the Vietnamese with whom he worked?
I think that the Vietnamese that understood his degree of commitment, the totality of his commitment, they overlooked
his weakness,
his extreme personality in some ways. I think that Van is one of those people that you either liked him or you didn't like him. You know, I liked him for what I saw that within him that made it possible for him to get some things done.
Just the operational guy.
Yeah,
that makes it happen.
Yeah, the operational aspect, I think.
How close did you work with Van? Is it just
Van?
Yes.
Well, I never really worked for him. But when I first met him early in '63, and he was complaining that the 7th Division didn't really know what was going on even across the river from Vital. I went over one night and spent a day and a night kind of around that ferry landing area, and I did see some communist presence, from which I hid cleverly, and I told him that it was an evolving country and situation, and he just had to be patient and find the ones that would be good to work with, and that there were some of those like that. His personality, I think, made it difficult for a lot of Vietnamese and a lot of Americans, because he was sometimes a bit shrill. He was argumentative. He wanted you to see his point of view and accept his point of view immediately, and that made it difficult. But alternatively, as a point of consideration, there were a lot of American advisors that didn't give a shit. You know, they were just filling a box on an organizational chart. But Van cared, and Van was going to get out, and he was going to try to get things done. So I think, in many respects, you might not be in complete accord with someone, but if you can see that they were trying to get things done, then you could work with them. Again, my brother Frank Snepp may have something to say about George Jacobson, who we call sometimes Jake, or Sam Wilson of Merrill's Marauders fame in World War II. You know, I had some differences of opinion with George Jacobson, but on those things that we could reach agreement, then he was worth spending some time with.
I don't want to delve into this, but you know, the bright shining light, Neil Sheehan's so-called the magnum opus about John Paul Van. Yeah. How much of the truth in there do you think it is?
Well, there's a lot of you know, there's a lot of truth to it. I know after it came out, Neil Sheehan, who's I think is also a likable guy, Neil Sheehan, spoke with me and asked me what I thought of the book, and I said, you know, overall I really liked the book, but he went into some detailed discussion of John Van's family background, and said some things about John Van's mother that I thought were just completely unnecessary. But other than that, I thought that Bright Shining Lie is worth a read. If you compare that book with Frankie Fitzgerald's Fire in the Lake, and you've only got room in your rucksack for one book to bring on a field trip, I'd say bring Neil Sheehan's book.
What do you think about the Second Republic with the President Win Van Til?
Well, I think I mentioned in my book that at one point, Ev Baumgartner, who always liked to use me as kind of his bird dog, you know, to point, he said he wanted me to go down to Kanto and meet then Corps Commander Tew. And so I said to Ev, I said, yeah, but I heard he's kind of a lightweight, that he's not doing very much. And Ev said, well, lightweight might be good, because might he not then rise to the top?
Well,
So I went down and I did meet him, the only time I met him in my life. And he was, I thought, presented a fairly austere, non-committal appearance. He seemed to have an understanding of what was at work and in places not at work in Forecore. And my sense is that given the environment, the time, the other personalities within which he had to work, he did fairly well. But you know, and go back to if the American government had adopted the Lao barrier effort that I very much on the margins insignificantly advocated with one person in the cabinet to no avail, then the Republic of Vietnam would have had time.
that's what we need.
To mature. Yeah, every country needs time, and that's what would have been needed.
Well, I know that you're also in touch with the so-called civilian side, rather than the military, like President Thiel. Do you think there's a possibility that we could have had a civilian leader instead of the military?
I think
one like Thiel. Was that possible?
Well, I think that it may have been eventually possible. I think that Vice President Hung was aged in every way physically at the time, but I applaud what he tried to initiate in terms of the anti-corruption campaign. It was really great. I think that Rector Baum of the Institute of Administration, Jacqueline Baum's husband at the time, was a very perceptive, clean, living, highly qualified person. If he had received an appointment that might have led later to an elected position, all kinds of things could have happened. But the key was providing an opportunity for the South to be isolated from the North. And we weren't doing that. Instead of doing what I felt, if we were going to do anything at all militarily, and that's the first choice you make. Are we going to intervene militarily? And then the second one should be to what end, to what goal? And then the third question should be how to do it. Well, we didn't address the third question successfully.
I think in the jaws of history, for example, Museum was saying that Phan could have been the prime minister and the country would have headed in another direction had he been elected. Or what do you think of that? Is he innocent? I mean, is he ignorant of the thing, or is he just saying for the sake of, presenting a democratic face to the South Vietnam, or was that a viable option at all?
I don't think that. With respect to everything that those gentlemen had coped with in the 1930s and 1940s, I think that they just weren't up to the task of the 1960s and 1970s.
Okay.
I think that a new era, new leadership was required, and we were unable to create the conditions within which they might have thrived.
Well, nobody knew what's left. Nobody's prepared for the future enough. Nobody's seen far enough into the future to make that kind of preparation that you are referring to.
Yeah, well, in any country, in any set of national circumstances, it's difficult. Look at America today.
Okay, Frank, I think we were touching on the different branches of different organizations within the government that couldn't share information with one another. And we think about the time that you were detailed with the CIA and you were setting up this so-called database for all of the officials in Vietnam about corruption. Tell us about the project. And
well, Bill Colby wanted me to do it with an emphasis on allegations of corruption involving people that had some responsibility for rural development funding, rural development funds. And so in the first instance, I was receiving, while I was in his office, information from American advisors. Mostly, it seemed, civilians who were civilian advisors who were sensitive to this kind of thing. And a lot of it had to do with diversion of building supplies, for instance, rebar, concrete mix. And I would faithfully document the information and file it. The files were maintained in MACV at the time. There were two difficulties I felt with the approach. Given that it was better to have some information of this nature compared to no information, all right. But then as I discussed the expansion of the files in file cabinets with Bill Colby, I asked him, what were we going to do with this information? I understood that the information with respect to a district chief, let's say, who was diverting materials for his own benefit, that would be taken up with the Prime Minister's office. And you might well have, and in some instances you did have, transfer of a district chief, replacement. In other more serious cases involving, I felt more serious cases involving higher ranking government officials, including even, let's say, a cabinet minister, what was going to be done with that information? Since to the extent possible, given other needs for my time and tasking, to the extent that I had attempted to verify or grade the reliability of that information, what was going to be done with respect to a province chief or a corps commander or someone, let's say, who worked on the Central Pacification Committee out of the Prime Minister's office, or
even the Prime Minister himself.
Let's say someone within the Prime Minister's family. Mm-hmm. Despite our working together for some time, and I think considerable mutual respect, I never had a satisfactory answer to that. In practice, it seemed to be that documentable, provable allegation of corruption at a low level would be managed by change, removal from office. With respect to what might transpire at a higher level, it was ignorable, and in practice was ignored.
how do you actually go about it? How do you document? What do you have in the beginning before you coming into this corruption file? Is there anything there before? Is it your very initial thing that you have zero things?
I didn't find anything when I was asked to start.
And what year was that?
That was in 19. Let me see what that would have been. That would have been in 1970.
70. Okay.
Yeah, early 1970.
Early enough, because American just came in 68. You only had 2 years. And
Oh
you
no, well.
I'm talking about Americanization of the war. I'm not talking about the whole effort.
The Americanization and the establishment of chords.
So 2 years.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
how did you go initially about collecting this information? Who are the people working for you?
Well, initially, because sorry to tell you, I had other interests and other duties too. I didn't have the interest in it that maybe perhaps someone might say I should have or I could have had. But right from the beginning, I thought there was going to be a contradiction in terms of what I would collect and what might be done about it. You know, secondly, I was certainly not going to be the person who was going to manage the consequences. You know, I was not going to be the person who would go to the Prime Minister's office. In the end, that was going to have to be Bill Colby who would do it. As far as I know, the information that I arranged in those files was not shared with the embassy either. I don't know that it may have been done so by someone else, but in terms of the expansion of those files, which had begun by, to some degree, by my predecessor, Everett Baumgartner, who had worked with Colby. It was at that point all low-level stuff involving, I would say, misappropriation of local resources. During the time that I handled it, the quantity, quality, and value of the problem expanded, and there were some allegations with respect to smuggling and other instances, but the files expanded, but they remained stagnant as far as I can tell in files. And there was one point where it seemed strange to me that we would be going to the Prime Minister's office to make a complaint about a district chief in Quezon, let's say, the Mekong Delta, who had misappropriated some refugee supplies, and we were doing so in the presence of a person on whom we had some documentation. Did you
ever talk seriously with Colby before this project start? Like, who would be behind these things at first? So why was it all of a sudden an issue that wasn't an issue before, and it has to be?
I think because the reports started coming. The Chords organization, when it was saddled upon MACV, was the first time you had a countrywide collection of data on the part of personnel that were, for the most part, either civilian or heavily influenced by the Comer-Colby thinking about the need to improve the quality of life in the countryside, and even in parts of cities.
And do you think this decision is at the advisor level, the people in Vietnam, or is it something like congressional asking for accountability for the project?
I don't think it had anything to do with congressional, because had it been that, then I think at some point a visiting congressional representative would have asked for access or wanted to look at things, and to my knowledge, it never happened. Now, I have to say also that for me personally, this was a minor
duty.
Minor duty, that Colby had asked me to take on. But I had so many other things, and as he said during our initial discussion about whether I would work for him or not, he didn't expect to see me in the office every day. That I would be out and about and in other parts of the country and coming back. I tried. His secretary was named Tina Capazinas, and I tried to. If I was going to be in I-Corps, I would tell her I would be in I-Corps so she could reach me.
So were there a lot of Vietnamese playing supportive role in the collecting effort, information about the corruption?
There were some, because there was an element in MACV called Pacification Studies Group, which had some significant Vietnamese employees, Do Minh Nhut being one of them, Tran Hu Chi, who survived and lives in the Atlanta, Georgia area, not in Atlanta. And many of those people were people who had begun with me during the period when I was with Special Forces. And I had ultimately about 60 or 70 Vietnamese cadre who undertook special missions around the country, some of them involving training, some of them other things. And we had them all for a time. Some of them were on a CIA payroll, some were on a USIAA payroll, some were on a Special Forces payroll. But in January of '66, we had merged them all onto a Special Forces payroll. And then in my absence, a good fellow named Gordon Huddleston, whose family is coming to visit me next, he's dead now, but his family's coming to see me next week. Gordon Huddleston kind of took over the overall responsibility for this assortment of 70 or 80 people. But then the newly arrived commander of Special Forces decided that he was not going to do those kind of special tasks anymore. He was going to do other things. So just at that point, I came back to do some work with Bob Comer before Colby, and Huddleston saw me and said, "What are we going to do?" So I said, "Okay, we'll take some of them and put them with John Van in 3 Corps, because Van wants to have his own little intel net. We'll put some of them in the Vung Tau Training Center with Win Bae, and some of them." Right now, we'll put into what became Corps, because Comer is a little bit dependent on me for advice on how to organize and set up things. So we'll call it an evaluations group, that they evaluate the conduct of operations at the district level and below. And
that's the main one. That's the main one.
And they work with experienced Americans like John Libran from Special Forces, or Jerry Dodson, who'd been with me before. They work with experienced people, and they submit special reports. They don't do routine reporting, they do special reporting. Okay, so then when I came back and I was working with Colby, about 2 years later, I find out that it still exists. And that is generating a lot of significant reporting.
Okay. So that's your main apparatus?
Well, that's one of them, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see. So you people like Trần Hữu Chí and Do Minh Nhut is actually those persons behind all these files, making up the database.
Many of them, but once they showed they had an interest in it, then other people became interested too. See, so that the range of those sources from which reports arrived increased. But it began specifically with that group that I put into.
So what's the purpose behind collecting all these, other than accountability for the effort, the pacification?
Initially, what I told Comer is, I said, it's better to know than not to know, because he asked the same question. He said, "What are we going to do with that?" I said, "Well, in the first place, they'll be doing other things as well. They're not just going to be looking at that. But it's better to know than not to know. Secondly, it gives you data with which you can use when you're asking for a replacement.
Well, you just get basically the map of the competence of the South Vietnam if you have that, because you look at that, at least the transparency of what they're doing and for what purpose.
It had
it's very important. As I look at it right now, it's probably the main thing you should look at. It's like the map of the
the
capability of people.
Was very important, and the other thing is it did not have just to do with issues like corruption or quality of performance, but one of the things I was interested in when I kind of kick-started something like that in the beginning with Comer pre-Colby was that I wanted us to be aware of the difference between organizational reporting that would come up from district advisors, Americans, and province advisors, versus real-time situational reporting.
Definitely.
And my example at that time was having taken a team with John Librand and Jerry Dodson. It was the Long Hu area, again in Long An province, where the province senior advisor and the province team had reported tremendous success in swinging this area from Liberation Front control to government control. So we three go in there with three of the new evaluators, formerly with me in Special Forces, and we find out that
it wasn't like that at all.
There's still communist presence on Long Hu Island, that the government presence is restricted to a little area on the northern side of the island, that the regional forces company doesn't go anywhere outside of their little fortress area, that there are not many, but there are a few communist cadre out there in the hamlets, that the roads are still trenched so that government vehicles cannot get down to the other side of the thing.
What's the usage out of that? Once when you, in the beginning, you probably have a fuzzy idea of what's going to be using. That's the first question that.
Well, I thought I thought that Comer could use it to insist on enhanced performance.
That's the minimum.
Yeah, that was but I was always looking at minimums, because in the best of circumstances, usually minimums were all you could accomplish in the field. Sorry to say.
Why was it that it's? I mean, I know that there are different organizations running from different heads inside South Vietnam, and the CIA is always very suspicious. Should I call that, or is that just their nature to keep the information within the organization instead of sharing it to other agencies? In there, how do you feel about their keeping everything to themselves?
Well, I understood that. I mean, I was not working within CIA, but I have friends in CIA, and some of the people I worked with on the outside had either CIA experience, or maybe even in the case of Bill Colby, future significant experience. But within their profession, sources, and it's not just the confidentiality of those sources, but it's protecting those sources from careless disclosure is really, I think, very important.
Yeah, that's quite understandable.
I think it becomes part of the the character and nature of a man, and that's why when I would suggest not often, but maybe only a couple of occasions to Colby that he discuss the corruption files that were maintained in his office with the embassy, and I thought in particular two people that were receptive were because they wanted to know was Bunker, and then I thought of another person that Frank knows well, Ambassador Whitehouse. He became an ambassador later. Charlie Whitehouse was, I thought, sensitive to that and very bright, intelligent.
Well, there's no doubt that the Foreign Service would like to know what's going on with the CIA. My question was over here, was it so hard to share this information that would prove beneficial to the overall effort?
I think it's just organizational. I mean, I think it's just, you might say, adult toilet training, or organizational.
Could there have been a better way of cooperation other than the thing that you've already?
Well, I think it goes all the way back to Washington. I mean, I think there had to be an understanding of, what are we trying to accomplish? What is our best estimate of probable success? Is there probable success? What must be done to do it? I mean, I was just increasingly convinced that it had to involve isolating the North from the South via a line across Laos. That if that weren't done, then nothing else would work. That was my...
How important do you judge to have that database? I mean, does it matter at all if you do not have those database, other than for performance and everything? Did it do a lot? Was the price pay off when you set up that database?
I think it could have made it. I think in some instances it made a difference. I think that Comer and then Colby were able to bring about the removal of a couple of people. It may have had something to do with the shift of Vinlop from 2 Corps. It may have had something to do with the removal of the corrupt province chief in Bin Din, who made so much money from the air base at Phuket and other things. But it was so closely held. I mean, I don't think that the embassy in general knew exactly what were in those files.
Could the foreign minister, could the foreign office done anything else with that information if they have had that?
Well, the key was the Prime Ministry. Could the American State Department have done anything different?
Yes.
I don't think so. I think you had to have somebody there on the ground who was committed to the notion of using information double, triple, quadruple checked to achieve ethical performance.
How receptive is the government of South Vietnam to when you reveal these a little bit of these database to them and telling them that those are the ones who really incompetent and needed to go?
Well, I was told I never wanted to go to those meetings at the Prime Ministry. My interest was beyond Saigon. I didn't want to do that, but I was told by Jean Savaggio, who for a time had a desk in the Prime Ministry, that when Colby would be there and he would raise the issue of competence or malfeasance in office by a low-ranking officer, usually district level or below, that the Prime Ministry would take it seriously and would act pretty quickly.
If it's lower level.
That's sure, right? Yeah, that was.
What happened when it's higher? The higher up it is, the the less influence you have on it.
Well, again, I didn't want to get involved in that sticky flypaper, but I think that I think higher level instances, except possibly with respect to General Vinoy and his wife's cousin, I think it's cousin or nephew in Binh Dinh province, I don't think it was ever raised. You know, I mean, so.
What about on the the media side? I haven't asked you any question about the media side. The Vietnamese always complain about the New Yorker and the Washington Post and Chicago Tribune and Christian Monitor is doing a lot of damage to the certain government. Do you think their complaining was correct?
I don't know, because I didn't see many journalists at the time. I mean, I knew some of them.
Why? You don't have to know them personally, but the media at large, if you could look at it, did it do more damage, or it was helping to have the media in there?
Well, I think in the beginning, those few that I met in the period 63, 64, I think, were generally supportive
of the government,
of the U.S. Assisting South Vietnam. I think that somewhere the next few years, the tide changed, the tide shifted, and I think there's a certain degree of self-interest there that, journalists will write what people write books they think will be published. People make movies that they think will make money. Mm-hmm. Some journalists wrote stories that they thought would get printed. Not everything that a journalist submitted would be printed. So I think there was some of that, but I didn't have much. I didn't have any responsibility for it. Mm-hmm.
How do you feel personally, though? I say the Second Republic because I think the first one there's virtually almost no media except the government, and all of the journalists was kind of expelled. At least that's the view that David Halberstam was writing about.
Well, some were expelled, but some seemed to do all right. I thought he was expelled, in fact, but I thought Francois Sully of Newsweek was fairly well informed, but he was expelled, and then subsequently he was killed in the helicopter accident with Joe Cautrey. I must say I did not know many journalists. Yeah, I mean, I did meet some occasionally, but.
But did you feel the accusation? Some of them feel like a large part of losing Vietnam was because of the media. The media was on the left, leftist, pro-communist, and saying all that.
I think if they'd all written negative stories, but we'd done the right things, I think we would have won. See? I mean, they wrote some negative stories, but we did a lot of wrong things that didn't work. I like Peter Arnett. When you grind out stories to the extent that Peter had to, there'll be some inevitable errors in some of them. But there were a lot of errors in McVie reports, in Juspow reports, in probably Cord's reports, in CIA reports. I mean, everybody who authors material makes mistakes, I think. But I think the journalists, for the most part, did okay. When a baseball team loses, everybody points a finger and says, it's because you made an error at first base. It's because you didn't get that fly ball, But everybody will point fingers. But if we had done the right things, tactically and strategically, then, first of all, the journalists would have written much more positive stories. Secondly, how the war was covered would have been irrelevant, when you win a war.
Exactly.
See, and we didn't do the things that we ought to have that might have enabled us to win.
By 1965, when you Americanized the war, do you think that's a little bit too late by then? Should America have intervened earlier? Or do you think it's should not intervene at all? Or what's the question on that?
Well, again, I go back to the notion that I had, is that you isolate the North from the South. In theory, politically, by international relations, that is what some thought that the Geneva Accords would do.
Thought.
Yeah, thought, erroneously, dream-like, but if that was not going to be done by international agreement at Geneva, then I'm not talking about the Paris Accords, but the 1955 Geneva Accords, then it should have been done militarily. If it was important enough to commit American forces to South Vietnam, then it should have been important enough to do it at the most pivotal point, strategically speaking, and that would have been Lao Bao to Savannah Kep.
But you don't think that the intervention could have been earlier?
Well, where would the intervention have been?
I would say the point of 1965, when they have a lot of Americans come in militarily into the country, that's the, one would say that's the starting point of the Americanization of the war.
I think the important question is not when it would be done, but how it would have been done. And again, I think the key, I didn't see it clearly myself in 64 and 65. But by 66, I was seeing clearly that, if we don't isolate the South from the North, in actuality, as theoretically it was supposed to have been done, then we're not going to make it.
Now we come to the Paris Agreement. Some say that it's the best you could do. Some say it's the worst you could do. What's your judgment on that?
Well, Frank and I spoke to this last spring at the conference in Texas. I think it was sloppily done. I think that Dr. Kissinger was so eager to arrive at some agreement and divorce himself and President Nixon from the war that he overlooked problems within the agreement. And just to get into the fine details on it, as an indicator, I think, of his sloppiness, the final text of the agreement was not transmitted to the American embassy. Instead, when I prepared a booklet that would be used for the Joint Military Commission, I had to use the text as it was broadcast from Hanoi, rather than that which was transmitted from Paris to the American embassy in Saigon, because they didn't send the last minute changes.
Yeah.
Secondly, in terms of guidance to the field, they didn't pay any attention to the release of American prisoners in the South. Everybody's attention was on the American prisoners who would be released in Hanoi. But there were 23 that were released in the South. And when I went in there on that recovery effort, I found that the other side was assuming that on the same day American prisoners would be released, some of their people would be flown in, and some South Vietnamese soldiers would be flown out. an erroneous assumption, but there was nothing on paper to control what would happen. So it wound up being a bit of a snarl, and it could have been worse than that.
Mm-hmm. Well, for every project there are hiccups. And
well,
could you say those are just hiccups?
The main
point.
Potentially fatal. The American general, for example, was saying to me at one point, "Well, we'll just go back to Saigon." Okay, you had hundreds and hundreds of South Vietnam prisoners waiting to be flown out in blue pajamas. You had the 23 Americans there. I mean, you could have had suicides. Or if we had just gotten in the helicopters and flown away, as that general had suggested, then I'm sure the communists would have said, "See, they don't care about you. They're going back." So, all those, those kind of fine points have to be detailed. And there were some other things in the Paris Agreement also that just weren't nailed down very, very tightly. So I think that it was a scandalous agreement. And again, if we had done the right things at the right time, it would not have happened.
Okay. Yes, I think I understand at least that part of it a little bit more now.
Yeah.
And then I would probably interview you some more in the future, but I think I will let you rest now and take a break.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, I'm still a young fellow, 85. There will be a future.
Thank you. I feel like I'm the congressman today, and I have two of the very high officials to brief me. That's the feeling I have. That's the feeling that I had, dreamt about for a long, long time.
Yeah.